This morning, I was able to go with DEP and FWC to survey the impacts of red tide in the Tampa Bay area and to get an update on the mitigation efforts. At my direction, the state's been working with local communities here in Pinellas County as well as Hillsborough in an all-hands-on-deck approach to respond to the red tide that's been impacting the Tampa Bay area. I want to thank Sean Hamilton and Eric Sutton for their quick action and constant presence in response to the bloom. This has been a coordinated effort at all levels of government, with state, county, and city governments working together to clean up the fish kills resulting from this red tide event. And I was pleased to hear from everyone that was on the boat with me today that the bay looks a lot better than it did last week. And I think a lot of the reason for that was that everyone was on board to mitigate, and obviously we've put a lot of funding towards that and we'll continue to do more. So I thank them for their efforts. It really has made a difference, and you can see it not just being there in the boat. You look at the satellite imagery and how we're able to look at that now compared today to last week. It definitely has been an improvement. We hope that that will continue. Now, since taking office, we've made protection of water resources a top priority, including furthering our understanding of the complex issues surrounding red tide. When I was running in 2018, there was real intense red tide further south from here in southwest Florida that really had a negative impact on a lot of the livelihoods for employees and business owners and tourism in parts of southwest Florida. And so we came into office and we said, okay, we understand this is a difficult issue, but we want to put a lot of resources and expertise to bear to be able to provide ability to mitigate. So I reactivated the Red Tide Task Force, which had been dormant for 15 years, to research, monitor, and control and mitigate red tide and other harmful algal blooms in Florida's water. We also recommended the creation of the Center for Red Tide within FWC's Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, which has received $4.8 million each year since 2009 to detect, track, and mitigate red tide. Also signed legislation which established the Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiative, which is a partnership between FWC's Fish and Wildlife Research Institute and Mote Marine Laboratory to develop technologies and approaches to control and mitigate red tide and its impacts. We funded the partnership for a total of $18 million over a 6-year period. But also, equally as important, we developed a dedicated funding source in the annual budget to respond to red tide events, to respond to blue-green algae and other significant impacts, just like the one that we've been experiencing now. Before I took office, there was no dedicated source of funding in the annual budget to respond to red tide. That meant in order for the state to provide resources to assist in cleanup efforts, the state would have to actually declare a state of emergency and then grab unallocated general revenue. We've planned for mitigation efforts, we've appropriated the money for mitigation efforts, and we're using the funds just as they were intended to be used, and we're proud that we thought ahead and had the money ready to go. And so due to this proactive approach, DEP has already been able to commit $2.1 million to cover cleanup costs incurred for both Pinellas County and the city of St. Petersburg in response to this red tide bloom, and has the resources to continue to provide additional assistance. Hopefully the improvement here in the Bay is good. There is going to be, up and down the coast, you do see other blooms, so there's going to be a need to do mitigation, not just in Tampa Bay, but in other parts of the West Coast. I'm glad that I was able to see progress reported. I think that in addition to the financial resources, both DEP and FWC have significantly increased monitoring and sampling efforts in Tampa Bay and the surrounding areas to provide the most up-to-date information regarding the concentrations and locations of red tide. The monitoring samples has increased 165% year over year compared to last year at this time. FWC's also deployed a sampling robot, which is an innovative technology that provides unprecedented information about how many red tide cells there are at a given time and the behavior of those cells. The robot collects samples every 20 minutes and processed over 500 samples in the last week. FWC has also dedicated a fixed-wing aircraft and helicopter to help monitor bloom conditions and strategically identify areas in need of cleanup. So again, we are committed to being in this fight not just as we see through this current episode in the Tampa Bay, but understanding that this is an issue for the west coast of Florida that periodically occurs. And so we hope that some of the research that's being done will lead to even better ways to mitigate. I mean, for example, one of the things they're working on is doing some of this clay treatment. They've actually done a little bit of that here to try to see and monitor. You got to obviously know what you're getting into. You want to see what the reaction is and whether you're causing any problems. But they've been working on this ever since we really came in and got a lot of the funding landed. And so we're proud of that, and we're proud of the efforts that are going on. I also just want to thank all the folks here that are behind us. The local officials have been collaborating with Sean and Eric from really since we were here. I mean, in June, we were here because we saw the blooms. We were going through some of the things that the state has done. We heard some scientists about what was going on. If you looked at the map then and leading up until Elsa, clearly Elsa pushed more of the blooms into Tampa Bay and led to some really intense events. We like the progress that's happened over the last year, or excuse me, over the last week, and we're going to continue working side by side. FWC, DEP, our administration, working with the county and other counties that are affected, as well as municipalities that are going to be affected. And we obviously anticipate some of the beach municipalities as we see the tide impacting those beach communities. So we want to be all hands on deck approach, and we want to make sure that we're all in this together.